thank you, the few of you that have joined us so far. I think we should go ahead and get started just for time's sake so that I don't keep you longer than I should. We are making butternut squash soup today. And for those of you who don't know me or who are new to join us for the Teaching Kitchen, I'm April Rozzo. I'm one of Florida Cancer Specialist's registered dietitians. And Angie Mathewson is also one of our registered dietitians. She will be kind of moderating for me. She keeps an eye on the chat and Q&A boxes. Angie, are you raising your hand?
I'm not raising my hand, sorry.
So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat or Q&A boxes. Because like I said, Angie is keeping an eye on those and we'll be able to discuss and answer those questions as we go through. So delicious butternut squash soup. I have the butternut squash and the carrots already in the oven, just for time's sake, because it takes a little bit longer to roast those. So we're gonna pull them out in a second. We're gonna do some chopping of our veggies and herbs and things. And then we're gonna get right over to the oven so that we can start putting this all together in a beautiful fall soup. So let me pull the squash out of the oven. It takes 30 to 40 minutes to roast. Again, which is why I did it ahead of time.
And did you start with a whole butternut squash?
We talked about this the first Teaching Kitchen because I used a butternut squash then. I will never buy a whole butternut squash if I don't have to, because they are so hard to break down. The skin is really thick. They're hard to cut and get into. A lot of people do, especially if you're just kind of roasting the halves, to just cut it in half and get it in the oven that way. For my purposes, it is so much easier to buy the packages of already peeled and cubed butternut squash. And that's exactly what I did. I bought 2 packages. They're close to a pound a piece. And just opened the package, took that, chopped up the carrot to go with it, and tossed all of it with a little salt and pepper and olive oil. And then you roast it in the oven for, like I said, 30 to 40 minutes. If it's full butternut squash, if you have full halves that are not broken down, then it's going to take a little longer, about 40 to 50 minutes, because it's bigger, it's just more volume. Oven at 425. And then, like I said, if it's chopped up, 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes. And if it's halves of butternut squash, 40 to 50 minutes. You can do that in advance. I don't recommend skipping that step. Number one, it'll make the soup cook faster because now the squash and everything is already soft. But also, roasting the butternut squash, it gives the butternut squash a more intense flavor. It brings out the sweetness, the natural sweetness of the squash. So I very much recommend that you do that step, that you roast everything first.
And that was in the produce section where you get the containers of butternut squash?
Yes.
I will have to look for that. I've only seen it in the freezer section.
And you can do frozen. The last time that I made this soup, I used frozen because I didn't see any of the fresh in the produce section. So frozen is fine. But over at Publix, which is where I went, they had it, because these days you can get your zucchini already spiralized now. So they have some of those prepackaged, pre-cut things over by the mushrooms and the bag of baby carrots. That's where I found the packages of the butternut squash. So we're going to peel so I just chopped some celery, because anytime you make soup, you are going to use onions, garlic, celery, and carrots, pretty much. Maybe not the garlic. I can't think of a soup that I have made without garlic, but at least the onions, carrots, and celery. So for this, we're also going to use a Granny Smith apple. Does it need to be Granny Smith? I recommend yes, because when I tried this soup before, I just used a gala apple that I had in my fridge. Some apples are more tart and more sweet than others. Some are a little bit milder. The gala apple was much milder, and it didn't bring as much flavor. You need the extra kind of sweet tart flavor that the Granny Smith brings to the table. Just like with applesauce, you want to use a tart, sweet apple for applesauce because it just has more flavor to it. So we're just gonna peel this. My peeling game is slow, guys. I'm sorry.
I actually recently saw a pictogram or infographic on apple, like the sweet versus tart spectrum on apples. That was kind of fun.
There are tons of apple varieties out there. And yeah, there's a whole range of super tart, which is the Granny Smith, all the way to very mild, which is like a Red Delicious, I think. So we're also going to use, oops, I don't need to cut my finger off with that huge knife.
No, we don't need that.
We don't need that at all. The nice thing about this recipe also is that you don't have to worry about like carefully mincing everything into really small pieces, because ultimately we want it small enough that it's going to cook, but we're going to puree everything. So it doesn't have to be neat. It doesn't have to be teeny tiny. You just want to cut it so that it'll cook. Like I can't just throw a whole apple in the soup and expect it to do anything. So we're just going to get rid of the cores and chop everything up. One of my reasons that I love butternut squash is, besides the fact that it's a great fall flavor and it pairs itself really well with things like cinnamon and sage and those kind of flavors, butternut squash is also a really huge source of nutrients for us. So butternut squash is a great source of dietary fiber to help keep the GI tract nice and healthy. It's loaded with vitamin C and potassium, antioxidants to help boost your immune system. So butternut squash is really good for us. Much like the potato, things like winter squash get misunderstood. People think, oh, that's too much carbohydrate, I'll gain weight. And the problem is what we do with the squash, just like what we do with the potato, right? Angie's laughing. Angie, What do we do with butternut squash?
Well, things like this, I'm thinking of sweet potato and the like casserole with the marshmallow on top.
Yes. And butternut squash, when you roast it in the big halves, what do? We cover it with butter, right? Same with potatoes. We deep fry potatoes, or we cover them with butter. We bake them and then stuff them with butter and sour cream. So it's not the squash or the potato that's bad for us. It's how we use them and what we do with them. So if you guys are unfamiliar, I've got some ginger root. And I just need a teaspoon of it. And the quickest, easiest way to deal with the ginger is to just cut the sides off, cut the skin off. And that way you can get to the actual ginger. Oops, where am I going here? And again, it doesn't have to be fancy. We just need it chopped up.
And April, Jane is telling us she uses butternut, makes it in bulk, and then divides it into 1 quart containers to freeze, which I know we're going to get to talking about how this freezes.
I love that, Jane. And I use, because it's just me, I'm just feeding me, I use muffin tins instead of the quart containers. Because this muffin tin, this kind of jumbo muffin tin, is the perfect 1 serving.
Okay, when you said you froze it in muffin tins, I was thinking like, wow, April's portions are way smaller than mine. But jumbo muffin,
Makes more
that
sense,
that's
right?
plausible, yes.
So the beauty with those muffin tins is that they are nonstick. So you don't have to spray them or grease them or anything before you put the soup in. You just ladle the soup in there, freeze it overnight to get a good hard freeze. We're doing some garlic now. I'm just going to chop up some garlic. The recipe says 3 to 4 cloves. I'm using 3 because my cloves are pretty big. So if you're a huge garlic fan, use 4. But anyway, so the muffin tins, you just pour the soup in, freeze them, and then take the pan upside down, run it under hot water, and the soup will, the frozen puck of soup will slide right out. And then I just put all of those single servings of soup in a Ziploc bag, and then throw it all back in the freezer, and I'm good to go. And that way, you don't have to feel like you're stuck eating the soup all week.
Yeah.
You know, you can just eat it when you're in the mood for it. And then you've got more in the freezer for when it feels like a soup day.
I bet those silicone muffin tins would be fantastic for that too.
Oh yeah, that you probably don't even have to run it under hot water at that point.
Right, yeah, you just pop it out.
Pop it out.
And you are such a wonderful chopper. And I think it is not as hard to chop garlic as I once thought it was. The same is
Right?
probably true of ginger, but I'm just going to make my monthly plug that both ginger and garlic come pre-chopped if anybody's afraid of their knife.
Indeed they do. And I will also make my usual plug for meal prep. And if you have a food processor in your possession,
Yeah.
I buy a whole bunch of garlic cloves all at one time. And I essentially do the same thing as if you were to buy a jar of pre-minced garlic at the grocery store. I just buy all the garlic cloves, smash them like you saw me do, because then the skin peels right off.
Mm-hmm.
And then throw them all in the food processor, let the food processor mince it, and I keep it in a jar in the fridge.
And you know, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm glad that you repeated that, because all this time I still just thought that you did that, but chopped it with your knife and then put it into, I know you said the food processor,
Right.
but it's like just getting through my skull that you use the food processor for that. And I might actually try it when right now my jar is this big that I have of garlic. So if I still remember that you said this, when I get to the bottom of that, I'll try it.
That's hilarious. Yeah, doing it all by hand would just defeat the purpose of making it easier.
Got it.
Yeah. So I do it by hand here and now because it's a cooking demo, and it wouldn't make much sense for me to have everything pre-done.
Absolutely.
So, but yes, when I'm just cooking for me at home, I absolutely use the stuff that's already done in my fridge. So for sure. We're going to use a shallot for this. You can use any onion. You can use a white onion, yellow onion, red onion. I like the shallot because it's a little bit milder, a little bit sweeter. And so again, it just helps bring out those flavors that are in the soup with the sweet Granny Smith apple and the sweet butternut squash. I just think it goes really well together. So that's why I'm using the shallot.
Yeah, I was looking into shallots a little bit. I use them more recently since I got HelloFresh and they send them. But it's there. I saw it's described as a subtle mix between traditional garlic and onion, and I do find that to be true.
And so again, I'm not being super careful. I know you can't really see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting little slits in there so that I can get a little bit of a dice or mince. And that way, as it cooks up, it blends all those flavors into the soup. But again, you don't have to be super careful with it because we're going to puree everything.
And if you were going to use an onion for whatever reason, you think probably a sweeter onion, like a yellow onion, or I think a red onion would be pretty gross in this.
So strong. Yeah. A red onion is so pungent
Yeah.
that I'm not sure that would really lend
I think it would
itself.
overpower everything else.
Yeah. Now you could also do something really mild, would be like the chives or the green onions. So that would be an option. But again, the green onions are so mild that you actually may be better off using those as a topper when you're serving the soup and just sprinkling some chives on top versus actually cooking them and maybe losing some of that fresh flavor that you get from the chives. So lots of versatility. You can leave the onions out completely if you're allergic or have some kind of aversion to onions. That would be fine also. It just everything you put in the soup just adds another layer to the flavor. So that being said, we're going to heat up our pan really quickly. I'm going to throw about a tablespoon of olive oil into the pan. Okay. We're going to cook the onions first because that's going to take the longest. The shallots are going to take about 5 minutes or so to soften. And then we're going to kind of add everything else in and get to cooking. And then what I have over here, what I haven't done anything with yet, I've got some vegetable broth, some coconut milk, low-fat coconut milk, salt and pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg. We're going to kind of use those at the end to flavor the soup. That warmed up. Okay. Now sage, so I mentioned sage. I've got some dried sage here. Butternut squash goes really well with sage. It pairs really well. Sage you'll also see a lot in stuffings, Thanksgiving stuffings for the turkey. So sage is part of the mint family, which I actually did not know until I started looking it up. But it does, when you smell sage, it's sort of this combination of minty, but also a little earthy, pine and citrus, like all of those, if you can imagine all those flavors together, that's kind of what sage is. And so it goes really well with things like turkey and butternut squash, stuffing. I actually have a recipe for an apple stuffing that has sage in it, like apples and dried cranberries and sage. That's really good. So that'll be in our soup as well. All right, so we're going to take these shallots, our pan's nice and warm. Get all those in. Okay. Now, Angie, before we started, so I don't think everybody was actually on the line yet, you were talking about your husband not calling this a meal.
No, he even if the soup has like noodles in it and meat, it is not a meal. So yes, if presented with a vegetarian puree, that would not be a meal.
So for anybody out there who feels that way, you have some options. It certainly doesn't have to be the whole meal. You could do a small bowl of soup on the side, you know, with something else, with a salad, with a sandwich, with cooked chicken or fish or whatever it is that you're having, and you just have a smaller portion of this. The other option that we were chatting about earlier, that to be fair, I have not tried, you could take, especially if you're trying to keep it vegetarian, silken tofu. So if you know anything about tofu, it comes in different forms. It comes in extra firm, firm, silken. So the silken tofu is very creamy, almost like a pudding consistency. You actually can use it in pudding. And so you could easily add some silken tofu to this before you puree it, you know, so that it would blend in. It would just add thickness and creaminess to the soup without adding any flavor. But it would also add protein to make it more substantial as a meal. All right, so you can see my oven cam The onions are starting to get soft. They're going a little translucent, the smaller ones. They're getting a little brown. So we're going to go ahead and add our other stuff. Hopefully I don't drop the spoon. But we're going to add this is our garlic and ginger. We're going to throw that in. And then our celery. And I'm going to leave that over here, actually. Our apples. And then we're also going to add in the sage at this point. We're going to cook it, saute it for about another minute or two, just to let the celery and the apples start to soften before we add in the butternut squash and the broth. Okay.
And doing it this way, adding the solids before you add the broth, you put again another layer of flavor because you caramelize the outside a little bit.
Yeah, by sauteing them, by caramelizing the outside, you're intensifying all of those natural flavors that are especially that are in the apple. Mm-hmm. You take sometimes raw garlic can have a slightly bitter taste. So by cooking it, softening it, you're softening the flavor, you're taking that bitterness out. So yes, we're doing all of those things. And ginger, interestingly, ginger has a lot of possible health benefits. I love cooking with ginger. It has phytochemicals, so the antioxidants to help boost the immune system. It's being studied for its anti-inflammatory properties. And I don't know about you, Angie, but I recommend it a lot, not in supplement form, in natural form, but I recommend it a lot to help with nausea, upset stomach.
Yeah, I do very often. Mm-hmm.
So forms like ginger tea, where you could put a little bit of lemon or honey in it, ginger ale, anything that has natural ginger in it can, not severe upset stomach, but mild upset stomach, it can help take the edge off. So I recommend it for that a lot.
Yeah, I do too. And honestly, if people are very nauseous, even a ginger snap seems to settle the stomach. It's like got the action of a saltine in terms of its starchiness, but then it's got a little bit of the ginger to it. I think I do like the tea, and I think ginger lemon is a nice combo for the nausea.
And for me, the ginger is very strong. It's a little bit bitter for me. And so I add just a little squish of honey to my ginger tea to help take the edge off, like to help subdue some of that bitterness. So, but that's up to you.
On the other hand, not for nausea, but just for a fun flavor. And you and I have different palates, but I have a turmeric ginger tea. So in that case, turmeric is a stronger flavor than ginger. Yeah. So the ginger kind of makes that more subtle, but gives you like this other way to ingest turmeric.
Absolutely. And I have had like a yogurt-based veggie dip, like a creamy veggie dip that had turmeric in it that I really enjoyed. It was very tasty. I actually attempted turmeric in the butternut squash soup when I was testing it, and I thought it was awful. And I didn't know if that was just my taste palette for not loving a strong turmeric taste. But I didn't want to take the chance that it was awful.
Well, I think you've got a really well balanced, profile here of flavors. So
yeah, so we're doing okay. So I'm holding off. I just increased the heat because we want to bring this to a simmer. We're going to cover it. So I added in the vegetable broth, the carrot, and the butternut squash. while we were chatting. So I turned the heat up to medium high, and we're going to cover it so that we can get it simmering and get it cooking. We're going to let it cook for about 10 minutes. So we are going to go a little bit over time. Sorry, guys. But then after it's done, we'll be able to add everything else in and puree it, and we'll be good to go. So I am going to be using an immersion blender. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite kitchen toys, so that I can just put it straight in the pot and puree everything and blend up my soup all in one pot. But if you don't have one of those, you can absolutely use a blender or a food processor. You can just do it in batches and pour some of the soup in and puree it, pour it out, put the rest of the soup in and puree it and mix it in like that. I make soup enough that I love this little gadget, this little tool. So that's what we're going to use. Just going to bring the heat up a little bit more. And frankly, it probably won't take 10 minutes. I'm going to leave the lid on for now so I can keep the heat in. Everything is so soft already. The celery was softening. The apple was softening by cooking it, by sauteing it. The butternut squash and the carrot are already cooked because they were roasted beforehand. So it says 10 minutes. When you're pureeing everything, you don't necessarily need to do 10 minutes. If everything's nice and soft, you're good to go. Somebody asked me, I got an email last week. Somebody asked if they could do it all in the crock pot, the slow cooker. And I said, yes, I don't see why you couldn't. You could just put all the ingredients in the slow cooker on low and let it go until the veggies were all soft and cooked, and then blend it, puree it. I think the only thing that you're going to lose by doing that is the roasting and sauteing ahead of time, bringing out all of those flavors. You're not going to get that in the crock pot. And even
you could do it in the Instant Pot.
Yeah.
Because you can saute first, and then, although I'm not sure how much you'd gain because it's only doing this for 10 minutes anyway.
Right. And that's, I had said the reason that I don't do it in the slow cooker is because it cooks up so quickly, without doing it in the slow cooker. There's no reason to for me. But if you're trying to kind of do things ahead, you don't want to stand at the stove, you want to just be able to put everything in, you can. I think you just lose some of the intensity of the flavor. The soup probably just comes out a little bit more mild when you do it that way. Even recipes for slow cooker meats a lot of those recipes tell you to sear the meat first before you put it in the slow cooker, for the same reason, to get the sear, to get like that nice intensity of flavors and the crust on the outside, because you won't get that in the slow cooker. So
you could probably roast everything, like not just the carrots and the butternut squash, but the onions and even the apples. And celery.
The apple is going to cook a lot faster. Like you're not going to leave the apple in the oven for 40 minutes.
Yeah, I still don't know how much you gain.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and good, we're bubbling. So you can check out my oven cam. We got a nice bubble going on there. We're going to I'm going to put the lid back on and just let it cook. I mentioned we're going to add cinnamon and we're going to add some nutmeg. Not a lot, just like a little pinch of each, because butternut squash does have a natural sweetness to it. And so the cinnamon and the nutmeg just help bring out that flavor. It just helps intensify the sweetness. Just like, if you make something with pumpkin pie or the pumpkin spice lattes, they all have cinnamon and nutmeg in them too, because the flavors pair so well together. So we'll do that.
Which we were talking yesterday. This is a recipe uses all of those flavors without, the added sugar of the pumpkin spice latte. Not that you can't have your annual one, but this is a nice way to have those fall smells in your kitchen.
Yeah. I know I'm waiting for it to get colder before I treat myself to a pumpkin spice latte. I want it to be worth it,
Yes.
So my mom and I, speaking of the spices and cutting back on the sugar, my mom and I have started making chai latte at our own chai lattes at home, so that we can control the sugar that goes in versus buying them at Starbucks where they're loaded with sugar. So I have all the spices. I just buy the spices in bulk, and it's cardamom and cloves and cinnamon and ginger, and you just kind of steep all those spices. You boil all those spices in water, and then you add the tea bags and steep the tea. And you take the whole spices out, you strain them, and then you add some milk and a little bit of brown sugar. So I have cut the brown sugar amount in half, and I'm using skim milk, fat-free milk. So now that chai latte doesn't look so bad. I can enjoy it with a whole lot less guilt, All right, so now we're cooking. And you can see the apples are starting to fall apart. Hopefully you can see that in the cam here. So everything is nice and soft. I'm going to turn the heat off. Whoops. Sorry, guys. I didn't mean to give you vertigo there. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to go ahead and blend this. How much you blend it is kind of up to you. Do you want it super creamy? Do you like it a little bit chunky? You have options. It's all blended.
And if people are kind of mulling over the immersion blender,
yes.
it really it doesn't take a lot of room to store, and you have one less dirty dish. Mm-hmm. It's also, I think, safer than trying to transport it to the blender to puree.
Right. Well, and that I am all about fewer dirty dishes for sure. If you use the regular blender, you're taking it all out of the pot, you're putting it in the blender, then you're putting the pureed soup in a separate pot, so that you can puree the rest. That's a whole lot of dishes that I don't feel like.
And I can take mine apart to throw it in the dishwasher, but a lot of times I will just rinse the blades under water unless it got, really dirty.
Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that we are getting nice and pureed. Okay. Yes, I made a little bit of a mess with it squirting out. So part of the problem is that burner is still hot, so it's still kind of boiling. I'm going to transfer it over here and get it off the heat. Okay, and then we are just going to take our coconut milk. I'll put it back on the heat in a second, and that way you guys will be able to see it. But our coconut milk, our salt and pepper. We're going to do our pinch of nutmeg, and then a little bit of cinnamon. The nutmeg is really strong, so if you're deciding how much to use, more cinnamon, less nutmeg, because the nutmeg has a very strong flavor to it. So we're just going to mix all that up. I'm going to put it back on the heat a little bit, just because the coconut milk was not warm. So I've taken the temperature down a little bit, and I want to get all the spices mixed in.
And you're adding the coconut milk after it's mostly cooked. I do that with dairy milk so that it doesn't curdle. Is the same true for coconut milk?
So I've never seen coconut milk curdle since it's not dairy. I'm just in the habit of adding it afterwards. So that there's not so much liquid in the soup that it literally sprays everywhere.
Right, a little tidier.
Yes, because that would be the other issue. And you guys can see, there are still some little chunks in here of celery and butternut squash. obviously, I will puree it down further to really blend everything up. For time purposes, I just wanted to move things along so that you could see it. And what you also could do, what would be delicious with this, is once you've got it kind of plated and serving it, you could top the soup with some toasted pumpkin seeds, which would give it a little crunch. The pumpkin gives it a little bit of protein. So you've got lots of options with that. So just so that you guys can see it, it's got a beautiful color. You know, you've got the orange from the butternut squash, but it's light and creamy from the coconut milk. See?
It looks delicious.
And this would be the size of an on the side serving. So that you can have something else to go with it, you know?
Right, right.
Yes. Any questions? I thank you guys for sticking with me late. I apologize.
That's probably my chattiness.
Yes, but it's okay. Any questions before I let you guys go?
There aren't any questions in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay. So next month is a webinar on mindful eating. And then in December, we're back in the kitchen for a cranberry maple steel cut oatmeal.
Oh, that sounds good. I'm taking it to breakfast.
That's right. Why not? We haven't yet.
Yeah. We just have some thank yous and looks tasty. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.